If you enjoy spine-chilling, ultra-realistic horror stories that'll keep you up at night, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a terrifying tale. Also, I'd love to know where and at what time you're watching this. Drop it down in the comments below, whether it's 3 a.m. in your bedroom, midnight on a road trip, or a rainy evening at home. Let's see who's watching in the creepiest setting. When I was a kid, I didn't have much money. My mom raised me by herself, working 2 jobs to keep us afloat in a small apartment near the edge of town. It wasn't a great neighborhood, but it was home. She was gone most of the day and night, so I spent long hours alone learning to take care of myself in ways no kid probably should have had to. For meals, I often walked to the McDonald's a few blocks away. It was cheap, convenient, and, back then, a Happy Meal only set me back a handful of quarters. The staff knew me by name, or rather, by routine. I'd come in with my small pile of change, order my usual, and settle into a booth by the window. For entertainment, I had my mom's old desktop computer, a beat-up Dell with a bulky CRT monitor, and a temperamental internet connection. This was years before smartphones or social media. Back then, if you wanted to meet people online, you used chat rooms. And to a lonely kid like me, those chat rooms felt like entire worlds. I'd log in every evening, sometimes until my mom came home well past midnight. The chat rooms were simple, sorted by location and interest. Mostly local kids my age, or so they claimed. We talked about games, school, or stupid jokes. There was one user I remembered better than any other, a guy named John. He was around my age and lived in the same city, maybe even the same side of town. We hit it off instantly, chatting about Counter-Strike, cartoons, and what little family we both had. For a lonely 12-year-old, it was a thrill having someone to talk to, even if it was through a flickering computer screen. After a few weeks, John suggested we meet up in person. He mentioned he'd be riding his bike over to a nearby McDonald's, the same one I went to. I was nervous, but also excited. I'd never met an online friend in real life before. We agreed to meet at 6 p.m. He said he'd be wearing a green jacket. I remember the excitement I felt walking to that McDonald's. I'd raided my mom's change jar again, grabbing enough quarters for my usual Happy Meal. The late autumn air was crisp, and the sun hung low in the sky as I hurried down the cracked sidewalk. When I got there, I scanned the dining area. No green jacket. No one who looked like a 12-year-old named John. I sat at my usual table by the window. The familiar faces of the evening crew were there behind the counter. Miss Tanya, the shift manager, nodded at me. I decided to wait a few minutes before ordering, just in case. 5 minutes passed, then 10. That's when I noticed him. A tall man in a long, stained trench coat stood outside by the window, staring straight at me. His face was pale, the kind of pale that looked sickly under the fluorescent streetlights. His eyes didn't waver. He didn't blink. Before I could look away, he shuffled through the door. He didn't pause at the counter. He didn't glance around. He made a beeline for my booth. I was frozen. He slid into the seat beside me, not across, but right next to me. A stale, sour smell clung to his coat. In his hand was a Happy Meal box. "You look hungry, little boy," he said softly, voice like damp gravel. "Would you like something from my Happy Meal?" My pulse hammered in my ears. "No, I'm okay. I'm waiting for someone." "Oh? You waiting for John?" That stopped me cold. My stomach turned to ice. How did he know that name? "He's my boy," the man murmured. "Said he was meeting a friend here. I thought I'd come check in. This isn't the best neighborhood for kids alone." He patted my shoulder. His hand felt clammy, skeletal. "I bought you 2 little treats while we wait." He placed the Happy Meal box in his lap and flipped the lid open slightly. Not enough for me to see inside. "Go on, grab something." A war raged in my mind. Part of me screamed to run, but another part, a lonely, foolish part, wondered if this was just some weird misunderstanding. Maybe John had sent his dad. Maybe this was fine. My stomach growled. I hesitated, then reached into the box. It wasn't food. What my fingers brushed against was damp, rubbery, cold. It clung to my hand when I tried to pull away. "Is everything okay here?" A sharp voice. Miss Tanya. Neither of us had seen her approach. She stood at the end of the booth, arms crossed, face stern. The man jumped. "Oh yeah, all good, miss. Just enjoying a meal with my son." Miss Tanya didn't blink. "Your other boy out there too?" she asked, jerking her chin toward the window. I glanced out, heart racing. No one was there. "I think you better leave," Tanya growled, "right now, or I'm calling the cops." The man's smile collapsed. In a heartbeat, he grabbed the Happy Meal box, shoved it aside. It clattered to the floor and bolted out the door. Tanya grabbed my wrist and pulled me up. "You okay?" I nodded, trembling. She called my mom, who came rushing down 20 minutes later. I sat in a chair near the back, sipping a free Sprite while the police took a statement. They didn't find the man. It wasn't until weeks later that I worked up the nerve to ask Tanya what was in the box. She gave me a long, haunted look and said, "You don't want to know." I eventually pieced it together myself. A few months later, my mom and I were watching one of those hidden camera sting shows that caught predators. They'd lure them to public places using chat room conversations. When they showed the man they'd caught that night, the face was unmistakable. It was him, the man from McDonald's. And where had they arrested him? At a different McDonald's, trying to lure a boy. I never went back to that McDonald's again, and I never used a chat room after that. To this day, I still get chills when I hear that line. "Would you like fries with that?" This story happened back in 1999, and even though a lot of things from my childhood have started to blur together, this one memory still sticks out with an uncomfortable sharpness. I was only 7 years old, and like most kids back then, I thought McDonald's was just about the coolest place you could go. The brightly colored signs, the smell of fries in the air, and of course, the Happy Meals with those little toys inside. It didn't get much better than that. That summer, I spent a lot of time at my uncle's house. It was one of those simple, single-story homes with a big backyard and an old wooden fence. The house sat just a few doors down from where my family lived, so my cousins and I were together constantly. Back then, my sister was 9, and my cousins were 5, 10, and 14. The oldest was a girl named Jane. Jane had basically been given the role of unofficial babysitter whenever we were all together. She was older, responsible enough to handle us, and surprisingly patient for a teenager. I remember it was one of those hazy, warm afternoons where the sun stayed out too long, and you could still hear the distant buzz of cicadas even after dusk. We were all getting restless, and one of us, maybe my sister, suggested we walk to McDonald's. It wasn't far, probably a 15-minute walk if we cut through the park and stayed on the sidewalks. Back then, walking places as a group of kids was just something you did. There weren't as many parents hovering, and the world felt a little less threatening. Or at least we thought it did. Jane agreed, figuring it would burn off our extra energy, and she grabbed a small wad of bills from her backpack. I still remember how excited I was, practically bouncing down the street. The whole group of us headed out together, a ragtag bunch of scuffed sneakers and faded cartoon t-shirts. The 5 of us made our way through the neighborhood, passing houses we'd memorized by their porch decorations or the types of dogs that barked behind fences. I barely remember the walk there, Other than that, we argued about which Happy Meal toy we wanted and who was going to get there first. When we arrived at the McDonald's, the familiar glow of the golden arches was like a beacon, promising greasy food and good times. We ordered our food, each of us getting Happy Meals, and then immediately made a beeline for the play place in the back of the restaurant. This particular McDonald's had one of those enclosed play place rooms, separate from the main dining area by glass walls and a door that kids could easily open and close. Inside were a few tables for parents to sit at and those plastic jungle gym tunnels, slides, and ball pits that seemed so enormous when you were little. At that moment, life felt perfect. We tore off our shoes and started scrambling through the tunnels, racing each other, playing tag, and occasionally popping out for a fry or a sip of our sodas. There were a couple of other kids there I didn't know, maybe 2 or 3, and we naturally folded them into whatever game we were making up on the spot. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I remember noticing a woman sitting alone in one of the chairs inside the play place room. At first, she didn't register as anything unusual. I assumed she was someone's mom, maybe one of the other kids' parents. She had shoulder-length hair, wore a blue sweatshirt with faded lettering on the front, and had a pair of sunglasses perched on top of her head. She wasn't eating anything, didn't have a drink, and didn't appear to be looking at her phone, probably because back then most people didn't have one. What struck me as odd, even in my young mind, was how she kept watching me. It wasn't like a passing glance. Every time I slid down the slide or crawled past one of the plastic windows in the tunnels, I could see her eyes following me. She wasn't smiling, wasn't frowning, just this flat, almost distant stare. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to my imagination. Maybe she was just watching all the kids play. A little while later, I went down one of the slides and, as luck would have it, ended up right near where she was sitting. I had to walk past her chair to get to the other side of the play place. As I did, she spoke. "Hi there," she said, her voice friendly but with something in it that made my stomach twist. I stopped out of instinct, polite the way I'd been taught. "Hi," I replied. She gestured to me, motioning for me to come closer. "You having fun?" "Yeah," I said, inching back a little. Then she asked me if I wanted some ice cream. I was confused. I'd already had my Happy Meal, and while I loved ice cream, something about this situation felt wrong. I hesitated, and that's when she said, "Come on, just real quick to my car to get some coins. It'll only take a second." The words landed like a stone in my gut. Even at 7, I knew the cardinal rule: never go to a stranger's car. I didn't answer. I didn't think. I just turned and bolted back toward the tunnels. I didn't scream, didn't cry. I just ran. Inside the plastic maze, everything smelled like sweaty kids and stale socks, but it felt safe. I scrambled up one of the padded ramps and ducked behind a corner, peeking out one of the windows. The woman was still sitting there, watching the entrance to the tunnels. I found my cousins and quickly told Jane. She instantly stiffened, her face serious in a way I'd rarely seen. "Stay here," she ordered, then crawled halfway down to where she could peek out too. But by then, the woman had left the play place. A minute later, Jane saw her sitting alone at a booth in the main dining room. No food, no drink, just sitting. We played it cool. Jane said we'd leave in 5 minutes and told us not to go near the play place door again. I remember feeling this awful, crawling sensation in my chest, but also not wanting to ruin it for the younger kids. Finally, Jane gathered us up and we made our way out of McDonald's. As we left, I felt that woman's eyes on me one last time, though I didn't dare look. The walk home was different. The air felt thicker, the sky darker. Halfway down the street, a faded gray car drove past us slowly. I could see the woman in the driver's seat, her face lit by the dash lights. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just stared. Jane noticed too. She whispered for us to stay close and quickened her pace. A minute later, the car passed us again. It was the quiet streets of a residential neighborhood. Not much traffic at all. We were too far from home for it to be a coincidence. Jane made a snap decision. "This way," she hissed, and darted into a stranger's front yard. We all followed, ducking behind hedges and backyard fences. I was breathless, terrified, feeling like we were in some kind of movie. Jane led us through 3 backyards and a narrow alley I didn't even know existed. Eventually, we popped out near the other end of our street. I don't think I've ever felt such relief as when I recognized our neighborhood. We made it to my uncle's house and ran inside. Jane locked the door and told her parents everything. I told them what happened in the play place, how she tried to get me to her car. They were furious, horrified, and I think someone called the McDonald's. Whether the police were involved, I never knew. What I do know is that I've never forgotten the look in that woman's eyes, or the way Jane instinctively knew how to keep us safe. Even now, decades later, that summer evening comes rushing back sometimes when I pass an old McDonald's, and I always glance at the play place windows. This happened just a couple of years ago, and to this day, it remains one of the craziest, most surreal experiences of my life. It started off as an ordinary morning. I had some freelance projects to work on, and instead of staying cooped up in my apartment, I decided to head to a nearby McDonald's. I'd done it before. McDonald's has free Wi-Fi, plenty of outlets, and usually it's quiet enough in the mornings to focus. Plus, you can't beat cheap coffee refills. It was a 5-minute drive to this particular location, one I'd been to more times than I could count. The dining room was nearly empty when I arrived. A lone older man sat by the window, sipping what looked like orange juice, and there was a young couple tucked into a booth in the far corner, sharing breakfast sandwiches. I grabbed a high-top table near an outlet, set up my laptop, and got to work. Time passed easily. I barely looked up from my screen, tapping away at my keyboard while sipping my coffee. At one point, I got up, stretched my legs, and ordered another cup. The place stayed quiet, with a few customers coming and going, but nothing noteworthy. 3 hours in, I decided to stretch again and grab one more coffee before wrapping up. That's when I noticed my wallet was missing. It had been in my jacket pocket, which was hanging on the back of my chair. Confused, I checked the floor around my seat, under the table, and inside my bag. Nothing. My heart rate picked up a bit as I retraced my steps in my mind. I was sure I'd had it when I first bought coffee hours earlier. I sat back down and checked my phone out of habit. That's when a bank notification caught my eye. A purchase at McDonald's, $1 10 minutes ago. I hadn't bought anything in at least an hour, and when I did, I'd used my debit card, but this was my credit card. I felt a cold rush of panic wash over me. My first thought was that someone must have stolen my wallet right there, inside this McDonald's, and was bold enough to use it while I was still sitting there. My eyes darted around the dining room. The older man was gone. The couple was leaving, but one man remained, sitting alone in a booth against the far wall. Mid-30s, wearing a dark jacket and a ball cap. He was on his laptop too, and next to him sat a large drink. No food. I stared at him, my mind racing. Was it him? It had to be. Nobody else had been in the dining room long enough to pull something like this. But what kind of idiot would steal a wallet and stick around, especially using it in the same restaurant? I didn't have proof, but the coincidence was too much. I debated what to do. I didn't want to accuse an innocent person, but if it was him, he walked toward one of the self-ordering kiosks by the entrance. I pretended to be engrossed in my laptop while watching him. He pulled out a wallet, too far for me to see details, and made a quick order. Not even a minute later, another purchase notification hit my phone, this time for $3. That was it. That was my proof. I stood up, adrenaline surging. My legs felt stiff from sitting so long, but I crossed the dining room quickly, heart pounding in my chest. I approached his booth as he returned from the kiosk. He noticed me when I was a few feet away. "Give me my wallet," I said flatly. He blinked, taken aback. "What?" "I know you took it," I said, holding up my phone. "I have charges for my credit card. I haven't left this restaurant." He shook his head, trying to look confused, but his hand shot to his laptop, closing it and stuffing it into a worn backpack. "I don't know what you're talking about, man," he mumbled. "Don't lie," I snapped. "You just made a purchase. I got the notification. You're the only one who's been here." I took a step closer. The man suddenly bolted from the booth, shoving past me. I instinctively reached out to grab him, but he slipped away, shouldering the door open and sprinting into the parking lot. I chased after him. Outside, the morning air hit me like a wall. He was running to a dented old blue sedan. I sprinted to my own car, parked just a few spots away. He started his engine as I did mine. For a brief moment, our eyes met across the lot. Then he peeled out of the parking space. I followed. I didn't think about it. Pure instinct. We turned onto the main road and I stayed behind him, keeping enough distance to avoid suspicion. I called 911, rattling off his license plate, make, and model, explaining what happened. The dispatcher stayed on the line, telling me to keep a safe distance. At the next light, he tried to lose me, running a yellow and gunning it down a side street. I stayed behind, heart thudding as we wove through suburban roads. He sped up, blowing through stop signs. I kept reporting our location to the dispatcher. After a few more blocks, I saw police lights in my rear view. A squad car passed me and took off after him. Relief flooded through me as I pulled over. Later, an officer called to let me know they caught him after a short chase. He'd ditched the wallet during the pursuit, but they recovered it from a storm drain where a witness saw him toss it. Somehow, all my cards and cash were still inside. When I returned to McDonald's, my laptop, bag, and jacket were still at my table. The food the guy had ordered was waiting on the counter. Out of spite and hunger, I picked it up. A sausage biscuit and hash browns. Not bad. Even now, I get jittery thinking about it. Not just because my wallet got stolen, but because someone had the nerve to do it while sitting 20 feet from me, and then stuck around. I still work at McDonald's occasionally, but I keep my wallet zipped inside my bag now. Lesson learned. I used to work at McDonald's years ago, and I had the job for just about 6 months. Most of the time that I spent there, I would just take people's orders behind the counter. I was young, barely 19, and it was one of my first jobs. At that age, any job felt like a big deal, especially one with a steady paycheck and free food after long shifts. I learned quickly that customer service wasn't for the faint of heart. One day, I remembered that the place was particularly busy. It was a Saturday afternoon in the middle of summer, and the heat outside had everyone piling into the restaurant, seeking refuge in the air conditioning. There were quite a few of us working that day. Me, a couple of other cashiers, 3 cooks in the back, and our shift manager, Linda. Linda was a tough, no-nonsense woman in her early 40s with short blonde hair and a perpetual air of irritation, like she was always 5 minutes away from quitting. The lunch rush hit hard and fast. The line snaked to the door, the soda fountain was constantly in use, and every seat in the dining area was taken. Orders were flying in non-stop, and the air in the kitchen was thick with the scent of hot grease, burgers, and fries. I was kept busy taking orders, calling numbers, and trying not to lose my patience when people asked for impossible customizations. That's when a man came up to order. Nothing about him really stood out at first. He was middle-aged, heavy-set, with a scruffy beard and wearing a stained ball cap. He placed his order, a double cheeseburger meal with no pickles and extra salt on the fries, and then disappeared into the crowd of waiting customers. I honestly didn't pay much attention to him until he came back about 10 minutes later, this time looking furious. He slammed his paper bag of food onto the counter so hard, it knocked over the napkin holder. "Hey," he barked, getting in my face. "These fries are cold, and there's pickles on my damn burger. I said no pickles." Right away, I could tell this guy was going to be a problem. His tone wasn't just annoyed, it was aggressive, loud, and demanding. I was in the middle of taking another customer's order and there was a long line behind them, but he didn't care. The fact that he just marched up and interrupted was not only rude, but made the other customers visibly uncomfortable. I held up a hand and tried to stay calm. "Sir, if you can give me just 1 minute, I'll get that fixed for you." He wasn't having it. He leaned in closer, his breath smelling like cheap beer, and jabbed a finger toward me. "No, you'll fix it now, and I want a refund too, or I swear to God I'll raise hell in here." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but before I could respond, I saw Linda approaching from the kitchen area. She had that look on her face, the one she wore when she was about to deal with another regular problem customer. "No, no, no," Linda said firmly, stepping between us. "We're not doing this again, Gary." It clicked in my head then. This wasn't some random irate customer. This was Gary, a known troublemaker, a guy who apparently had a reputation for pulling stunts like this to score free food. Linda crossed her arms and pointed to the door. "You're banned from this store, remember? Now get out of here before I call the police." Gary's face turned beet red, and he immediately launched into a string of profanities, shouting at Linda and calling her every name in the book. The entire restaurant went quiet. Customers in the dining room watched with wide eyes, and one mother pulled her small child closer. Linda didn't budge. She stood her ground, her face like stone. "Out, now." After a few more seconds of cursing and gesturing wildly, Gary finally stormed out. He shoved the glass door open so hard it bounced off the frame, rattling in place. Linda turned to the room and raised her voice. "If he comes back, somebody call the cops." The tension in the restaurant lingered for a bit, but gradually things returned to normal. I kept working, trying to shake off the encounter. But about 5 minutes later, I saw him again. Gary was outside in the parking lot, pacing around like a restless animal. Our restaurant had huge floor-to-ceiling windows, and from my vantage point at the register, I could see him clearly. He looked like he was talking to himself, gesturing and muttering as he circled the lot. I tried to focus on my orders, but I kept glancing back, half expecting him to charge inside again. A minute later, I saw him bending down near one of the landscaped rock beds that surrounded the parking lot. He picked up a hefty, jagged rock, bigger than his hand, and started walking toward the cars. My stomach dropped when I realized he was heading straight for Linda's car. It was an older silver sedan she always parked near the building for convenience. I watched in stunned disbelief as Gary climbed onto the hood of the car, standing tall like a deranged king surveying his kingdom. Then, with a manic grin on his face, he raised the rock above his head and hurled it at the windshield. The shattering glass made a sickening sound that echoed through the parking lot and into the dining room. Conversations stopped. Every head turned toward the windows. Gary threw his arms in the air as if he'd just scored a touchdown and started laughing. Loud, guttural laughter that sent chills down my spine. Then he jumped down and casually strolled away, as if he hadn't just committed an act of vandalism in broad daylight. I fumbled with my phone, dialing 911 with shaky fingers. I described the man, his actions, and where he was heading. A couple of other customers ran outside to... Linda came tearing out of the kitchen a moment later. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the shattered windshield. Her face went pale, then crimson with rage. She sprinted toward the lot, but Gary was already halfway across the parking lot, heading for the sidewalk. The police arrived within minutes, and thanks to the clear description and the fact that Gary wasn't exactly subtle, they found him wandering a few blocks away. He was arrested on the spot. When my shift finally ended about an hour later, Linda was still outside talking to the police, pointing toward her car and shaking her head in disbelief. I felt bad for her. That car was her pride and joy, and seeing it wrecked like that was heartbreaking. It was one of the wildest days I'd ever experienced on the job. After that, management installed extra security cameras in the parking lot, and a laminated photo of Gary went up in the break room with the words, "Do not serve. Call police if seen." I didn't stay at McDonald's for much longer after that, but I learned a valuable lesson that day. In fast food, you never know what kind of crazy is going to walk through those doors. I went to McDonald's at night not too long ago. I go there all the time, and usually late at night. You see, I work at Walmart, and I typically get off work at like 11 p.m. or so. I live in an apartment nearby with my roommate, and it's less than a mile away. I often walk to and from work, and right on the way back is a McDonald's. They're open 24 hours, so it became a bit of a ritual for me to swing by after a long shift. This one particular night started out no different from the rest. It was a chilly evening in late October, the kind where the air smells like damp leaves and the streets are quiet except for the occasional hum of a car passing in the distance. The neighborhood wasn't exactly bad, but it wasn't great either. Most of the businesses along the main stretch shut down by 10, so McDonald's was usually one of the few spots still open. After leaving work, I started my walk home. The streets were empty, and most of the houses had their lights off. I was hungry though, and the glowing golden arches in the distance seemed to call to me. When I reached the McDonald's, the parking lot was completely empty aside from a lone employee's car. The lights inside made the place look almost surreal against the dark night sky. I walked inside and made my way to the touchscreen menu near the entrance. As I was scrolling through my options, I heard the soft jingle of the door opening behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man walk in. He was kind of short, bundled up in a winter jacket and hat that didn't match the mild temperature outside. There was something about him that immediately felt off, though I couldn't place it. I glanced over and made brief eye contact. His expression was vacant, a half smirk on his face like he was in on a joke I didn't know about. Then, without any real context, he spoke. "I followed you from Walmart." The words were delivered casually, almost like a passing comment between friends. But I didn't know this guy. I blinked, confused, my brain scrambling to register what he just said. Before I could say anything, he let out a weird, breathy chuckle, then turned and walked away toward a booth in the corner. I tried to brush it off, telling myself maybe he was just some drunk or mentally unstable person. I finished ordering, grabbed my receipt, and went to sit down at the opposite end of the restaurant. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the place smelled like stale fries and cleaning chemicals. We sat there in silence, me waiting for my food, him sitting in the far booth, staring out the window like he was watching for someone. The employees didn't seem to notice or care. One of them was mopping near the drink station. A few minutes later, my order number popped up on the screen. I grabbed my bag of food and a drink and quickly made my way toward the exit. The man didn't move, but I felt his eyes on me as I pushed open the door. Outside, the parking lot was still deserted. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, and the chill in the air had picked up. I walked onto the sidewalk, trying to stay calm, hoping the guy wouldn't follow me. But after about 30 seconds, I heard the door behind me open and close. I glanced back. Sure enough, he was there, walking at a casual pace, hands in his jacket pockets, about 30 feet back. I quickened my pace. He did too. There was no one else around, no passing cars, no late-night dog walkers, just me and this guy in the middle of an empty stretch of road. I debated turning around and confronting him or ducking into a side street. The problem was, my apartment was pretty much a straight shot down this road, no alleyways or shortcuts. My heart was pounding now. Every few steps I looked back, and each time he was a little closer, not running, not even power walking, just that steady, deliberate pace, like he was in no rush because he already knew where I was going. When I was about a block from my apartment, I heard him call out, "Go ahead and run. I know where you live." That was it for me. I bolted. The adrenaline hit hard, and I sprinted down the street, my footsteps echoing off the buildings. I could hear his footsteps too, faster now. I didn't dare look back. I made it to the apartment complex entrance and fumbled with my keycard for a second before finally getting the door open. I slipped inside and let the door slam shut behind me. I leaned against the wall, chest heaving, listening for footsteps. Nothing. I looked through the glass door, but the street was empty. Maybe he gave up. Maybe he was hiding. I hurried up the stairs to my second-floor apartment and locked the door behind me. My roommate was already asleep, so I tiptoed through the dark living room and into my bedroom. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. 5 minutes later, there was a knock at my apartment door. I froze. It was a slow, deliberate knock, followed by a faint, almost gleeful laugh. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. It was him, standing there, grinning like it was the funniest thing in the world. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away down the hall. I waited several minutes before daring to open the door and look. The hallway was empty. The next morning, I filed a report with the apartment manager and called the non-emergency police line. They took my statement, but told me unless he came back, I still go to that McDonald's sometimes, but never alone, and never that late. I never saw the guy again, but I still check over my shoulder when I pass by. It still unnerves me to this day, wondering how he knew where I lived, whether he really followed me from work, or if it was all some twisted game he'd planned for someone random like me. Around the early 2000s, there was a strange and unsettling phenomenon quietly spreading through the country. A high clown epidemic. Reports of people being chased, stalked, or harassed by clowns were at an all-time high. Most of these incidents were brushed off as tasteless pranks or eccentric weirdos with too much time on their hands. But regardless of the supposed innocence behind them, it was downright terrifying for anyone who encountered it. The next story was inspired by one of the more disturbing urban legends born from that period. A sinister figure disguised as Ronald McDonald, who would allegedly terrorize late-night patrons at a certain McDonald's franchise. And while most dismissed it as a campfire tale, those who experienced it firsthand knew better. This is what happened to a friend of mine. We'll call him John. His roommate's name was Brad. The fall semester was in full swing, and both guys attended the same local university while sharing a cramped two-bedroom student apartment near campus. John was a quiet, introverted student, while Brad was the loud, boisterous type. The guy who always had his guitar out for impromptu jam sessions, regardless of what hour it was. Brad's relentless rehearsals for his rock band left John desperate for a quiet place to study. His refuge became a nearby McDonald's, a 24-hour location that doubled as a makeshift student lounge. It was rarely crowded during the late-night shifts, and John liked the solitude, the hum of the overhead lights, the occasional car passing by, and the soft hiss of the deep fryer in the background. The place had its regulars too. There was always a quiet, bookish girl who claimed the same corner booth every night. A few weary lawyers or late-shift nurses would wander in now and then, but most of the time, it was empty enough for John to focus on his coursework without distraction. John made it a habit to purchase a meal before settling in to avoid feeling like a loiterer, usually a Big Mac combo and a Coke. On his first late-night visit, the cashier's question gave him mild pause. "Would you like fries with that?" It was almost 3 a.m., and something in the cashier's voice seemed oddly insistent. John politely declined, not thinking much of it. A few minutes before 3 a.m., the bookish girl slid by his table, her eyes wide with concern. "It's almost time. You should probably pick up your fries now," she whispered. "What the hell are you talking?" John sat there frowning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He approached her cautiously. "I got the fries, now what?" "Just sit tight," she muttered. "It's literally going to be 3 a.m. any second now. You gonna tell me what this is about, Lainey?" She looked at him gravely. "You don't know about him? The clown?" "You mean Ronald McDonald?" "Yeah, but not the one you're thinking of. Haven't you noticed? They always ask if you want fries. It's not a sales tactic. It's a warning. You always have fries on hand, or else he'll turn you into a McFlurry." John couldn't tell if she was serious or completely unhinged. Before he could decide, the automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and there he was, a tall, gaunt figure in a faded, tattered Ronald McDonald costume. His face paint smeared, his wig askew. The yellow jumpsuit was caked in grime, the red stripes along his sleeves dulled with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. The figure stepped inside, head tilted slightly, scanning the room. The bookish girl tensed. "Stay calm," she whispered. The clown moved to the bookworm's table first. "Smells like this batch was fresh off the fryer," he crooned, in a voice that sounded more like a growl than a cheerful greeting. He reached out, plucking a fry from her container. She nodded stiffly. The clown chewed, licking his lips. Then he turned. "Well, well, what do we have here?" he murmured, eyes landing on John and Brad. John's stomach dropped. Brad had ignored John's warnings about the ritual, treating it like a joke. Now, Brad sat at their table holding a half-eaten Big Mac, a drink, and not a single fry in sight. Worse yet, John realized Brad had grabbed his fries off the table without him noticing. The clown sauntered over. John saw the insanity gleaming in his eyes. "I recommend you always have fries on hand," Lainey muttered again, "or else he'll turn you into a McFlurry." The clown loomed over them. "You lads got any fries for old Ronald?" he asked, his voice syrupy with menace. Brad laughed nervously, shoving a fry in his mouth. "Chill out, man. What is this? Some local prank? You guys do this for every newbie? John knew it was a mistake. The clown's expression soured. His lips peeled back in a snarl. "No fries for me," he growled. And then, chaos. The clown reached down, grabbing Brad by the collar, lifting him partially out of his seat. Brad's fries spilled to the floor. "I don't like being disrespected," the clown hissed. John tried to intervene, but the clown's other hand produced a large rusted spatula from his belt. The bookworm screamed as the spatula sliced through the air. "No," Brad shouted, struggling, but the clown was impossibly strong. The few other late-night patrons bolted for the exits. Lainey hurled her fries at the clown's face. It distracted him just long enough for Brad to break free. "Run!" John yelled. They bolted out into the night, the clown's enraged shriek following them. The next day, no one believed them. Security footage was conveniently erased. The McDonald's management claimed no knowledge of the incident. Lainey had disappeared. John never returned to that McDonald's again, but late at night, he'd swear he could still hear that voice. "Would you like fries with that?" Working at McDonald's has ruined my life. I thought it would just be a way to save money for the future while I studied at my local college, but it turned out to be the thing that ripped my future from my grasp. It all started in the summertime. I was working the drive-thru window, which is as mundane a routine as anything else you can do at McDonald's. All the orders were passing through my hands and into car windows in one monotonous blur, just like any other day. But despite the sheer number of people that passed by me during that shift, there was one individual who stuck out. The driver of the vehicle she was in was nothing special, just her whipped boyfriend. But her, I remember her. She had this awful helmet-looking wig of ketchup red hair, which just did not go with the rest of her style whatsoever. I tried not to stare. I looked up to the screen where the orders came through to see what they got. Her boyfriend ordered a Big Mac meal with a large Sprite, and she got a 10-piece McNugget meal with a large high C. That might not seem relevant, but I only say this because I know for a fact that I did everything within my responsibility to make sure they got what they were supposed to. I handed over the drinks first, then I held out the bag of food. I expected her boyfriend in the driver's seat to grab it, but instead, she reached over and snatched it out of my hands, giving me this dirty, ravenous look as she did it. I see weird things in the drive-thru, so that barely registered. "Have a nice day," I said as they sped out of the drive-thru. I thought I'd never see them again. I was wrong. Not a minute later, the woman with the ridiculously red hair walked inside. I saw her as I was grabbing a McFlurry cup from the front. She was standing there with her hands at her hips, impatiently waiting to speak to a manager in a very evident manner. By the time I made the McFlurry, the manager was with her. I wasn't really paying attention, but I could see she was being nasty for no good reason. I don't know what kind of day the manager was having, but he wasn't having any of this woman's attitude. They started screaming at each other. "You come into my establishment and you insult my employees? What the hell do you think you're doing in here? I ought to take you out back and rip your damn wig off, you piece of..." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her spit in the manager's eye, and to my horror, he slapped her across the face. He immediately regretted it. I could see it in his expression. He vanished from the counter and disappeared into his office. That's when the crazy woman went berserk. She started hollering at the top of her lungs, pushing stuff off the counter, throwing random objects into the kitchen. She hurled over a cup of straws, sending them skittering all over the floor. "What, y'all think I'm stupid? Think I can't count? I got a 10-piece, not a 9-piece. Maybe I rip off one of your fingers and see how you feel about it." She was making an awful scene. At that point, I couldn't help but look. Several of my coworkers went to the counter to try and calm her down, or get her out of the restaurant. But she was inconsolable. She grabbed one of those plexiglass barriers that hung in front of the cash register and hurled it towards someone. It nearly stabbed their eye out. Still, the corner of the plexiglass sliced them in the temple. Blood spurting down their shirt. "Let me see that witch that gave me my food. Come on, she needs a good beating." I realized she was talking about me. And that's when she jumped the counter. She locked eyes with me at the window and lunged. But she was caught by a small crowd of employees who tackled her and threw her out the door. But she came back, over and over. Every time we thought she was gone, she'd storm back in and throw something else at people in the kitchen. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the manager came out and shouted at her, "The cops are on their way. You really want to throw your life away over one chicken nugget?" At that, she disappeared. The cops showed up about an hour later, asked a few questions, and took a copy of the security footage. I thought she'd get fined or spend a few nights in jail, but we never got word that she'd been caught. 3 or 4 months passed, the season changed. I pretty much forgot about the whole thing. Pretty much everyone moved on, even the cops. Then one day, I was working the drive-thru again and I saw her. She came back with her boyfriend, ordered the exact same thing. My heart sank to the floor. When she came up to the window, I recognized her immediately. She still wore that same awful red wig, but this time she looked even more insane. She stared me down with this creepy, deranged smile, like some kind of psycho about to pick their next victim. But she didn't say anything. She just took her food and drove off slowly, keeping eye contact with me through the window until they were out of sight. I thought about calling the cops, but figured she'd leave once she counted all 10 of her nuggets. The rest of the shift was uneventful. The sun went down. Right before I walked out the door at closing, I remembered I'd seen her that day. Just as a precaution, I grabbed my keychain and clutched the little pink bottle of pepper spray I'd had since sophomore year of high school. It was probably expired by now, but I figured it was better than nothing. I pushed open the door and made long, quick strides for my car. Within seconds, I heard footsteps behind me. Fast, I fumbled with my keys, looking for the unlock button. I looked back. She was still standing, staggering, wiping at her eyes. Bloodshot, the skin around them swollen, red, and covered in thick tears. She bared her teeth like a rabid animal and screamed horridly. Then she charged. I yanked open the car door, jumped inside, and locked it behind me. I thought I was safe. But before I could even calm my nerves enough to start the car, a rock bashed into the window, smashing it like a wine glass. I shrieked. Her hands came through the broken glass, grabbed me by the hair, yanked me through the door, over the shards, and dropped me on the pavement while still grasping at my scalp. She struck me in the face repeatedly, using her nails like claws, cutting my face and eyes, splitting my lip, scarring my cheeks. "Yeah, this'll teach you to disrespect me, you little punk. You gonna remember me." I don't know how long I was taking that beating for. I didn't fight back. I just clutched my car keys so she wouldn't steal it. Eventually, I heard my manager come out, start yelling. That's when she dropped me to the ground and ran off, disappearing once again. And what's worse, the police still haven't found her. They don't care enough about me to go looking, but she ruined my life. I quit my job after that day, moved back in with my parents. I missed my college graduation because my face was so messed up. I'm too scared to go outside. I'm just worried that I'm going to run into her again and she'll recognize me. I used to work at a McDonald's many years ago. I was probably around 20 at the time, stuck in that awkward limbo where you're too old to be a carefree teenager, but too young to have your life figured out. McDonald's wasn't my dream job or anything, but it paid the bills, and the people I worked with were, for the most part, decent enough. Most of the time, I worked as a cashier, taking people's orders, bagging up their food, and handing it over with a plastic smile. I often worked at night, and sometimes those nights could drag on forever. Back then, the McDonald's I worked at stayed open until 2 in the morning. The late night hours were usually pretty dead, especially on weeknights. Things would start to quiet down after about 8 p.m., and by 10, you could practically hear the hum of the fluorescent lights over the occasional beep from the fryers. Every now and then on weekends, or during a random weeknight with no rhyme or reason, a bunch of people would roll in late. Sometimes drunk college kids, sometimes families on road trips. But generally, it was a slow, quiet place after dark. The kind of environment where your mind starts playing tricks on you, and every shadow seems like it might move if you stare too long. One night stands out vividly to me, though. I remember it with almost uncomfortable clarity. I was scheduled to work until 2 a.m. like usual. I can't tell you what the date was, or even what month, only that it was chilly enough to see your breath when you stepped outside. I remember that because I'd left my jacket in the break room and had to run out to my car earlier in the evening, regretting it the entire way. That night, after about 10 p.m., it was just me and one other coworker. Her name was Gloria, and she was one of the few people I actually liked there. Gloria was a couple of years older than me, had been working at that location for several years already, and had finally made shift manager. She was one of those people who took the job seriously, but wasn't uptight about it. She had this dry sense of humor that made even the most annoying customers tolerable. At that point, I was still up front, handling orders, and Gloria was in the back, running the kitchen solo. It wasn't unusual for it to be just us. If the business was slow enough, they'd send everyone else home early to save labor costs. The hours ticked by in that slow, heavy way they do during night shifts. Around midnight, I found myself standing at the register, absent-mindedly tapping my fingers against the counter. No customers, no noise, aside from the TV Gloria had on low volume in the kitchen and the occasional hiss from the fryers. I glanced out the window and saw a man standing alone in the parking lot. He was close to the building, standing near the sidewalk that ran along the front of the store. He wasn't moving, just standing there and staring straight at me. It was strange enough to catch my attention instantly. He had long, unkempt hair and a thick beard, his face shadowed by the brim of a ball cap. I guessed he was maybe in his mid-30s, though it was hard to tell in the dim, flickering light of the parking lot lamps. At first, I thought he was waiting for someone inside, but then it hit me. No one else was there. The place was empty except for Gloria and me, and he was staring directly at me, not at the building, not glancing around impatiently like someone waiting for a ride. I shifted on my feet, trying to convince myself it was harmless. Maybe he was just lost in thought. Maybe a drunk guy waiting for an Uber. But the longer he stood there not moving a muscle, the worse the feeling in my stomach got. After maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like much longer, I couldn't take it anymore. I left the counter and headed into the back. Gloria was leaning against the prep table, watching some old sitcom rerun on the tiny grease. Finally, at 2 a.m., we locked up. Gloria had to stay a little longer to finish closing out the registers, and I was eager to get out of there. But as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I hesitated. The parking lot was mostly empty, a few scattered cars and pools of flickering yellow light. I didn't see anyone. Still, something told me to move fast. I pushed through the doors, made a beeline for my car, a beat-up Honda Civic parked a couple rows away, and got inside, locking the doors the